The alarms screamed through the prison like angry sirens. Guards rushed down the hall, their boots pounding against the concrete floor. David was one of the first to reach the fallen prisoner. The man lay shaking, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. Foam gathered at the corner of his mouth, and his hands clawed at the air as if he were drowning. "Call medical. Now!" David shouted. Within seconds, a medical team arrived, pushing a stretcher. They checked the prisoner's pulse, opened his airway and gave him oxygen. Other guards locked down the entire cell block. Heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing hundreds of prisoners inside their tiny rooms. The hallway became silent again, but the fear stayed. Word spread quickly. 3 more prisoners in different parts of the prison had fallen sick after eating the same meal. All had the same symptoms: shaking, trouble breathing, and sharp stomach pain. The food trays were rushed to the lab for testing. No one was allowed to eat until the cause was found. That night, David returned home exhausted and worried. He barely touched his dinner. "They think someone poisoned the food," he told Laura and Ethan. "But we don't know how. Security is tight. Nothing gets in or out without checks." Ethan felt a chill run through him. Could a prisoner do it? David shook his head. Not easily. The kitchen is one of the most guarded places. Only trusted staff work there. The next morning, investigators arrived from Washington. They questioned kitchen workers, guards, and supervisors. Cameras were reviewed. Food shipments were tested. Every detail was examined. Days passed. The sick prisoners slowly recovered, but fear stayed behind. Many inmates refused to eat, even after new meals were prepared. Some guards brought their own food from home, afraid of eating anything inside the prison. Ethan watched his father grow more tired each day. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He barely slept. Then something strange happened. One of the kitchen workers, a quiet man named Robert Hayes, did not show up for work. At first no one worried. People got sick. People missed days. But when guards went to his apartment, they found the door open and the place empty. His phone was smashed on the floor. His wallet was gone. Robert Hayes had vanished. Security tightened even more. Armed guards stood in every hallway. Meals were prepared under watch, tested twice, and delivered with extreme care. Still, whispers spread. Some prisoners said this was just the beginning. Others said a hidden group was planning something much worse. Late one night, while David was on duty, a warning light flashed in the main control room. A storage door near the kitchen had been opened without permission. David and 2 other guards rushed there, weapons ready. The hallway was dark and silent. The door stood slightly open. David slowly pushed it wider. Inside, he found dozens of empty chemical containers stacked neatly against the wall. And written in black marker across the concrete floor were 3 terrifying words. This was only practice. David's heart pounded as he stared at the words on the floor. This was only practice. His mouth went dry. Whoever had done this was not finished. They were testing the system, learning its weaknesses, and planning something far worse. The room was sealed instantly. Investigators rushed in, taking pictures, collecting samples, and scanning every corner. The empty chemical containers were tested, and the results sent a wave of fear through the prison. The chemicals were dangerous but carefully measured. Just enough to make prisoners sick. Not enough to kill. Someone had planned this very carefully. The prison went into full lockdown. No visitors. No outside deliveries. No movement without permission. Guards worked double shifts. Every tray of food was inspected again and again. Still, no one knew who was behind it. At home, Ethan could see the stress breaking his father down. David barely spoke. When he did, his voice sounded tight and worried. Who would do something like this? Ethan asked one night. Someone with a reason, David replied. Someone who wants attention, power, or revenge. Days later, a small clue appeared. A hidden camera near the kitchen caught a shadowy figure slipping into a supply room late at night. The face was unclear, but the body shape looked familiar. David felt a cold shock when he saw the video. The walk. The posture. The slight limp. It looks like Robert Hayes, he whispered. But Robert was gone. A search team was sent out. 2 days later, his car was found abandoned near a quiet mountain road. Inside the trunk were more chemical containers and a notebook filled with strange symbols, numbers, and short messages. One line stood out. Food controls the prison. Investigators believed Robert had help. Someone inside ADX Florence was working with him. Someone still inside. Fear spread through the guards. Trust broke down. Everyone began to watch each other. Then late one evening, a new shipment of food arrived from an outside supplier. It had passed all checks, but something about it made David uneasy. He ordered extra testing. The results came back clean. Still, David could not shake the bad feeling. During dinner service, Ethan's father watched closely from the control room as trays were delivered. Everything looked normal. Prisoners picked up their meals. Guards stood ready. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. Then a loud crash echoed through one of the cell blocks. A prisoner dropped to the floor, screaming in pain. Another followed. Then another. David's blood ran cold. "Shut it down," he shouted. "Lock all doors." Alarms screamed again. Medical teams ran through the halls. The sick prisoners were worse than before. Their breathing was weak. Their skin turned gray. Some lost consciousness. This time it was not practice. David realized the horrifying truth. The poison had not been in the food itself. It was in the water used to cook it. As panic spread through the prison, David received a chilling message on the secure system. A single line of text blinked on the screen. "Now you understand. Next time you won't stop us." Before he could react, the power in the control room flickered. And the prison lights went out. Darkness swallowed the control room. For a split second, the only sounds were the echo of alarms and the fast breathing of frightened guards. Then emergency lights snapped on, casting long red shadows across the walls. The prison felt like a giant, angry machine that had suddenly lost control. "Backup power now," David shouted. Technicians rushed to their stations. Generators rumbled deep underground, and slowly the systems came back online. Cameras flickered. Doors locked again. Air systems restarted. But the damage was already done. More prisoners had collapsed. Medical teams worked non-stop, moving stretchers down narrow halls, their faces tight with fear. David stood frozen, staring at the screens. His mind raced. Someone inside the prison was helping Robert Hayes. Someone had poisoned the water. Someone knew exactly how the system worked. Hours later, the emergency finally slowed. No one had died, but several prisoners were in critical condition. The water supply was shut off, and bottled water was rushed in for guards and medical staff. The kitchen was closed completely. That night, David could not go home. He sat in a small office, replaying camera footage again and again. He searched for anything out of place. A strange movement. A missing shadow. A door opening 1 second too long. Then he saw it. A guard named Mark Benson, a quiet man who had worked at ADX Florence for years, entered the water control room late at night. His badge opened the door. He stayed inside for only 3 minutes. When he left, he looked calm. Too calm. David felt sick. Mark Benson was one of their own. The next morning, investigators brought Mark in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He said he was checking pressure levels. He said he was following orders. But when shown the footage, his face turned pale. After hours of silence, Mark finally spoke. "Robert didn't want to hurt anyone," he whispered. "He wanted to show the world what this place really is. A cage. A slow death." Mark explained that Robert believed the prison was inhuman. He said the food was terrible, the isolation cruel, and the system broken. Robert wanted attention. He wanted the public to look inside ADX Florence and see the suffering. But poisoning people? David snapped. "That's not justice. That's evil." Mark lowered his head. "It started as a message. Just fear. Just sickness. But Robert, he changed. The power changed him." Before Mark could say more, alarms blared again. Not emergency alarms, security alarms. A prisoner named Victor Kane, one of the most dangerous men in the prison, had somehow unlocked his food slot and slipped a metal tool into the hallway. It was small but sharp. In ADX Florence, even a tiny weapon could start disaster. Guards rushed to his cell, but Victor was waiting. He smashed the tool against the camera, blinding it, then began pounding on his door, shouting. "They poisoned us. You poisoned us," he screamed. "Now we make you feel our pain." Other prisoners joined in, banging on their doors, screaming and shaking their cells. The quiet prison turned into a storm of noise and rage. David ran toward the cell block, knowing the situation could explode at any moment. And deep inside the prison, hidden behind layers of steel and concrete, a final plan was already in motion. The hallway shook as prisoners slammed their fists and feet against thick steel doors. The noise rolled through the prison like thunder. Guards tightened their grips on their weapons, their eyes scanning every camera screen. In ADX Florence, a full prisoner uprising was almost unheard of, but tonight fear and anger had pushed men past their limits. David ran through the corridor, his heart pounding. He could hear Victor Kane's voice rising above the chaos. "You starve us. You poison us. "Now you pay," Victor shouted. Inside the control room, alarms flashed red across multiple screens. Several food slots had been forced open. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone had given instructions. David reached the cell block and raised his hand. "Lock it down. Total isolation protocol." Heavy doors slammed shut one after another, sealing entire sections of the prison. The noise dropped, but the tension only grew thicker. Medical teams continued treating the poisoned prisoners. Some were shaking. Some were barely breathing. The smell of chemicals hung faintly in the air. Every guard felt the same terrifying thought: what if this happens again? Investigators pushed Mark Benson harder. Under pressure, he finally broke. "Robert is still nearby," Mark whispered. He never planned to escape far. He wanted to watch. He wanted to see the fear. "Where?" David demanded. Mark swallowed. "An old service tunnel. It runs under the west wing. It was sealed years ago, but part of it still connects to the water system." David felt a cold chill. If Robert was there, he could still reach the prison systems. He could still poison. He could still destroy. A tactical team was assembled immediately. Armed guards, engineers, and medical staff moved carefully toward the hidden tunnel entrance. The air felt heavy as they descended into the dark underground passage. The tunnel smelled of rust, dust, and damp stone. Water dripped slowly from cracked pipes above. Their flashlights cut thin beams through the darkness. Every step echoed. Suddenly, a small red light blinked ahead. "Stop," David whispered. They froze. A wire stretched across the tunnel, connected to a device taped to the wall. A bomb. The team backed away slowly. Engineers moved in to disarm it, their hands steady but tense. After long, painful minutes, the device was shut down. But Robert was gone. At the far end of the tunnel, a hatch stood open, leading back into the prison's lower food storage area. David felt his stomach drop. They rushed back upstairs only to find chaos waiting. Dozens of food trays had already been prepared for the next morning's meals. If those trays were poisoned, the disaster would be beyond anything they had faced before. "Check everything," David shouted. Every tray. Every container. Every drop of water. Guards and kitchen staff worked in panic, opening lids, testing samples, dumping entire batches of food into sealed bins. Then one worker screamed. A large industrial pot of soup bubbled gently on the stove. Floating on the surface was a clear liquid, slowly mixing into the broth. Poison. At that moment, security cameras caught movement near the exit. A man in a kitchen uniform slipped through a side door, moving fast. David recognized the face instantly. Robert Hayes had come back inside. And he was running toward the main control system. If he reached it, ADX Florence would become a deadly trap with no escape. David did not hesitate. He sprinted down the hallway, his boots slamming against the concrete floor. Other guards followed close behind, their radios crackling with urgent commands. Cameras tracked Robert Hayes as he ran through narrow corridors, turning sharply, moving with wild speed. "Cut him off at Corridor C," David shouted into his radio. Robert knew the prison well. He dodged through service doors, slipped past locked gates just before they closed, and disappeared down a stairwell leading to the lower levels. His face was tight with fear and determination. Sweat poured down his forehead, but his eyes burned with a strange fire. David chased him into the dim underground passage where thick pipes ran along the walls. The air was cold and wet. Water dripped steadily, echoing like slow footsteps. "Robert, stop," David yelled. Robert glanced back, his eyes wide. "You don't understand," he screamed. "They deserve to know. They deserve to feel what these men feel every day. You're hurting innocent people," David shouted. "This isn't justice." Robert laughed, a broken sound filled with anger. "There are no innocent people in this place. Only cages and monsters." Robert reached a heavy steel door marked Main Control, Restricted. His hand slammed against the keypad. The door began to unlock. David lunged forward and grabbed Robert's jacket, yanking him back. The two men crashed to the floor. They struggled, rolling across the cold concrete. Robert was smaller, but his fear made him strong. He kicked, punched, and twisted, trying to break free. "Let me go," Robert screamed. David held on, his muscles burning. "It ends now." Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in David's side. Robert had pulled out a small metal blade. Blood soaked through David's uniform. Guards rushed in, tackling Robert to the ground. He fought like a trapped animal, but there were too many of them. They cuffed his hands and dragged him away, still shouting and laughing. Medical teams rushed David to the emergency room inside the prison. The cut was deep but not deadly. As doctors stitched his wound, he stared at the ceiling, his heart still racing. They had stopped Robert. But the nightmare was not over. Hours later, investigators searched Robert's hidden files. What they found made the room go silent. Robert had built a second plan. If he was caught, a final command would activate automatically. A system buried deep inside the prison network. A delay trigger. What does it do? David asked weakly. The technician swallowed. It reroutes the prison food system. Reroutes it how? Directly into the water reserve. If it activates, it will poison the entire supply. Every cell. Every guard station. Every medical unit. David's chest tightened. When does it activate? The technician's fingers shook over the keyboard. 3 hours. Panic spread through the control room. Engineers worked furiously trying to trace the signal. Firewalls blocked them. Passwords locked them out. Every second that passed pushed the prison closer to disaster. Ethan and Laura were rushed to a safe location. News helicopters circled overhead. Federal teams flooded into the area. But the system refused to shut down. 2 hours left. Then 1 hour. Finally, the technician gasped. I found it. But we can't stop it from here. Why not? David asked. Because the trigger is inside the water control chamber. David forced himself to stand. Pain shot through his side, but he ignored it. Then that's where I'm going. Guards tried to stop him, but he pushed past them. The countdown reached 30 seconds as David reached the heavy steel door of the water chamber. Inside, pipes hissed, valves vibrated, and warning lights flashed. And on the far wall, a digital clock ticked down toward 0. The red numbers on the wall blinked fast. 10 seconds. 9. 8. David ran inside the water control chamber. Pain ripped through his side with every step, but he forced himself forward. Pipes rattled loudly above him. Steam hissed from broken valves. The air smelled sharp and bitter like metal and chemicals mixed together. 7. 6. At the center of the room, a tall control panel glowed with warning lights. Thick cables ran from it into the water system. A small device blinked red at the base, counting down. 5. 4. David dropped to his knees and pulled open the lower panel. Inside was a tangled mess of wires. Red, blue, yellow, green. His hands shook. 3. A memory flashed through his mind. Ethan laughing at home. Laura waving goodbye. Quiet family dinners. Warm sunlight. He could not let them die. He could not let anyone die. 2. David grabbed the wire cutters from his belt. Sweat ran into his eyes. His heart hammered so loudly he could barely hear the alarms. 1. At the very last second, David cut the thick red wire. The chamber went silent. The blinking lights shut off. The digital clock froze at 0. Then, slowly, the warning alarms died away. Fresh air rushed through the pipes as clean water flushed the system. David collapsed backward onto the cold floor, breathing hard. It was over. Guards rushed in, lifting him gently. Doctors checked his wound and treated the bleeding. Engineers confirmed the poison system had been stopped in time. Not a single drop had entered the prison's water supply. Robert Hayes was taken away in chains, his plan finally destroyed. Mark Benson was arrested and sentenced. Security at ADX Florence was rebuilt stronger than ever. New systems were installed. New rules were enforced. Food preparation became the most guarded process in the entire prison. News of the event spread across the country. People were shocked to learn how close the prison had come to disaster. Reporters called it the prison food crisis of ADX Florence. For weeks, David stayed in the hospital. Ethan visited every day, sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. "You're a hero," Ethan said quietly. David smiled weakly. "No, I just did my job." But deep inside, David knew something had changed. He had seen how fragile even the strongest systems could be. He had learned that control, fear, and power could twist people into doing terrible things. Months later, life slowly returned to normal. The prison was quiet again. The food was safer. The guards were more careful. But the memory of that terrible week never faded. Ethan grew older, carrying the story with him. He told it to friends, teachers, and eventually to his own children. A story about danger, courage, and the thin line between justice and harm. And deep within the thick concrete walls of ADX Florence, the trays of simple meals still rolled down silent hallways each day. Beans, bread, soup, meat, ordinary food. But everyone who worked there remembered one chilling truth. In the world's harshest prison, even a single meal could change everything. The red numbers on the wall blinked fast. 10 seconds. 9. 8. David ran inside the water control chamber. Pain ripped through his side with every step, but he forced himself forward. Pipes rattled loudly above him. Steam hissed from broken valves. The air smelled sharp and bitter like metal and chemicals mixed together. 7. 6. At the center of the room, a tall control panel glowed with warning lights. Thick cables ran from it into the water system. A small device blinked red at the base, counting down. 5. 4. David dropped to his knees and pulled open the lower panel. Inside was a tangled mess of wires. Red, blue, yellow, green. His hands shook. 3. A memory flashed through his mind. Ethan laughing at home. Laura waving goodbye. Quiet family dinners. Warm sunlight. He could not let them die. He could not let anyone die. 2. David grabbed the wire cutters from his belt. Sweat ran into his eyes. His heart hammered so loudly he could barely hear the alarms. 1. At the very last second, David cut the thick red wire. The chamber went silent. The blinking lights shut off. The digital clock froze at 0. Then, slowly, the warning alarms died away. Fresh air rushed through the pipes as clean water flushed the system. David collapsed backward onto the cold floor, breathing hard. It was over. Guards rushed in, lifting him gently. Doctors checked his wound and treated the bleeding. Engineers confirmed the poison system had been stopped in time. Not a single drop had entered the prison's water supply. Robert Hayes was taken away in chains, his plan finally destroyed. Mark Benson was arrested and sentenced. Security at ADX Florence was rebuilt stronger than ever. New systems were installed. New rules were enforced. Food preparation became the most guarded process in the entire prison. News of the event spread across the country. People were shocked to learn how close the prison had come to disaster. Reporters called it the prison food crisis of ADX Florence. For weeks, David stayed in the hospital. Ethan visited every day, sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. "You're a hero," Ethan said quietly. David smiled weakly. "No, I just did my job." But deep inside, David knew something had changed. He had seen how fragile even the strongest systems could be. He had learned that control, fear, and power could twist people into doing terrible things. Months later, life slowly returned to normal. The prison was quiet again. The food was safer. The guards were more careful. But the memory of that terrible week never faded. Ethan grew older, carrying the story with him. He told it to friends, teachers, and eventually to his own children. A story about danger, courage, and the thin line between justice and harm. And deep within the thick concrete walls of ADX Florence, the trays of simple meals still rolled down silent hallways each day. Beans, bread, soup, meat, ordinary food. But everyone who worked there remembered one chilling truth. In the world's harshest prison, even a single meal could change everything.